Literally 80% of our environmental toxic load comes from the air that we breathe.
Hey everyone, super excited for this presentation in the Change the Air summit that we're doing here. I have Dr. Jill Carnahan here. Honestly, like one of my favorites, one of the most knowledgeable people that I know in all things functional medicine, specifically when it comes to environmental exposures and how that triggers stuff. And I'm giving my own bio for you before just reading yours. So I'm going to get off my fanboy box and I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Dr. Jill, and then she's going to get in and give you a presentation. Today, we're talking about the mold-gut connection, which is a really, really important topic. I've had to deal with it myself. So I know this is something a lot of my clients deal with too. I'm really excited to kind of dive into this stuff. So Dr. Jill, she's a board-certified integrative holistic medicine specialist. She's known as your functional medicine expert and often referred to as the Sherlock Holmes of Medicine for solving cases of the most well-known medical mysteries. I love it. Utilizing state-of-the-art testing, biochemical analysis, she helps each patient identify the root cause of their illness by identifying nutritional and metabolic imbalances that may be contributing to their symptoms. Dr. Jill uses nutritional protocols and supplements, lifestyle changes, and medication to increase patient level of function, and always seeks the gentlest and least invasive way to restore health and optimize healing, which I know everyone is probably very grateful for. So with all of that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jill, and she's going to get into today's presentation.
And Brian, before you do, can you hit the screen share button for me? I think just multiple. Yeah.
Yes, cool. I can.
Got it. Okay, there we go. Cool.
All right.
Well, hello, everybody. Before I jump into my slide, just want to say welcome. I am so excited and honored to be here with you today. I am all about clean air. And today we're going to talk about mold in the gut and just give you a little bit more overview about how our air quality can affect our gut and everything in between. So mold toxicity and air quality, the surprising ways it affects your gut. So let's dive in. So I want to give a background on why environmental toxicity, because it sounds like a big deal, like why is it affecting our health? I really believe this is the elephant in the room to many of the complex chronic illnesses, even our post-pandemic era. Many of the studies showed that the air quality massively affected the rate of transmission of COVID, the severity of COVID. So air quality, even in the recent event of the post-COVID pandemic, has had a massive effect on our health. And basically, we get toxic exposures from the air that we breathe. And if we're not aware of that, literally 80% of our environmental toxic load comes from the air that we breathe. And this can lead to common things: fatigue, memory disturbances, sleep issues, but more importantly, the epidemic of cancer, autoimmunity, and neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, MS, etc. So these things are all affected by our environment. I want to just talk about the concept of toxic load briefly, because this frames everything we're talking about. Basically, total toxic load is the idea that we're all born with the ability to detox. We actually have this ability. We're made detox machines. And we're going to go into that today, because I'll tell you how to detox, how to actually give you some tips and tricks to do that. But if you think of yourself as a bucket full of toxins, and as that load increases and the water level goes up and spills over the top, that's when you start to present with autoimmunity, with cognitive dysfunction issues or whatever. So these fatigue, maybe joint pain. So as that toxic load increases, you can think of it as lowering the toxic load in your bucket will help your health overall dramatically. And if you see a doctor like me, a functional medicine expert, or anyone in that realm, part of what they're doing is they're going to be looking at your toxic load and helping you to lower that through detox. And again, today I'll give you some practical tips on how to actually do that. So this is just to remind you, how full is your bucket? So what contributes to total toxic load? Well, our standard American diet with processed foods, trans fats that make our neurotransmitters very sticky, things don't function and signal well, heavy metals, mercury, lead in old paint, chemicals, residues, pesticides, fertilizers. This is why organic food is so important if we have the ability to do that. Food allergies, environmental allergies, molds, and mycotoxins, which we're going to be talking a lot about today. Even medications can contribute. And internally, if you have bacterial overgrowth, fungal overgrowth, issues in your gut, those can internally contribute to toxic load. Hormonal and metabolic toxins that aren't eliminated properly. Part of today, we're going to talk about how to eliminate properly. And that's so key, because toxic load, as we eliminate, we sweat, we pee, we poop, we get all those things out of our body. That's actually one of the important ways to detox. And if you're not thinking about mental, emotional, spiritual toxins, isolation, loneliness, anger, jealousy, hostility, these also are toxins on our system. Isolation and loneliness is actually a bigger predictor of mortality than smoking or obesity put together. So you might suspect environmental toxicity if you're having fatigue, joint pain, sinus congestion, headaches, gas or bloating, heartburn, diarrhea, trouble sleeping, food cravings, trouble losing weight, water retention. And I could go on because the environmental toxic load really does affect our health. And these common symptoms that we see are happening all the time. So genetics is a part of this. Like I always say, I got cancer at 25 and overcame that, and then got Crohn's disease a year later. And I had genetics that made me predisposed to having poor detox. So growing up on a farm, I had lots of toxic chemicals that probably allowed those cells in my breast to become cancerous at the early age of 25. And then I developed autoimmunity, also genetics. But what I want to remind you is we have something called epigenetics, which means we can actually change the expression of genes through the diet we eat, through the air that we breathe, through the lifestyle things that we do. So we have agency in this that we can actually change. Only about 15% of illness is just genetics alone without an environmental trigger. So just frame the background. I told you I had cancer at 25, then I had Crohn's. I overcame both of them to live a long and healthy life. But in 2013, we had a massive flood in Boulder, Colorado, where I live, and my office was flooded. The sequelae of that was that I had a massive toxic mold exposure the following year and got really, really sick. I just frame this because if you are going through something difficult, it's hard. And I'm so sorry for your struggle. I've been there. But part of the painful experiences is if we can look at them as a teacher, as something that actually gives us value and transforms our life. For me, that experience with mold allowed me to become a mold expert and really help a lot of patients who are sick. And having gone through that myself, I really learned a lot. Now, this next photo is kind of graphic, but I just show you so you see me happy, thriving, healthy here. But back in the day, my eyes were ruined. I lost all my eyelashes. I had horrible cystic acne. I had rashes all over my body. And this was me in 2015. I mean, I was a wreck. And this was from the mold toxicity that I was living in. And I just, again, show you that today. Number one, to show you that you can heal and you can be vibrant and healthy again. But number two, to say, I've been there. I've been in the suffering. I didn't know if I'd ever be better. I didn't know if my face would ever be clear again. And it's hard and it was painful, but there's always learning in the process. So just if you are out there and you're suffering, hopefully some of this information can be valuable and help you learn and grow from that experience. So let's go on to our main topic, which is mold and mycotoxins. These are some real photos of patients' homes. That first thing is a moisture meter that shows a high percentage of moisture behind that wall. And then behind that wall, you can see the black toxic mold that turned out to be some Stachybotrys. So what are symptoms of being affected by mold? The list is very, very long. I won't read this to you, but you can see fatigue is a big one. Memory loss is a big one. I'd say the most two common things I see after mold exposure are some sort of fatigue or weight gain and memory loss. And so this is real common. And a lot of people now, they say like 1 in 5, there's a recent study of college students. So young people are affected by long COVID. So some sort of symptoms. This can actually be very similar to some of the long COVID symptoms of fatigue, memory loss, brain fog. And sometimes the mold is affecting people who are having more symptoms because they're in a moldy environment. So these two things can occur simultaneously as well. Why is it important to find the problem? Well, one of the things about mold is if you're living in a moldy environment with toxic mold in your home, you're not going to get well. And that is hard to say because it's complex and you need to deal with the problem. And I know it costs a lot of money and time and it's difficult, but I just know from experience with myself and patients that if you have, it's like if you are in that bucket and your water level is up here and spilling over the top and you stay in that bucket and you're drowning, you're not going to get well. So one of the most important things with mold toxicity is finding the root in your home or workplace and then dealing with the problem. And of course, Brian, I just talked to, he's one of the experts in this and teaching patients and the public on how to find water damage in their homes. One of the things you might ask yourself that I ask my patients is, when do things start? Do you remember feeling well? When do things, you can actually write a timeline of when you started to feel unwell, when your symptoms started, and look back and see what might have transpired. Did you move to a new home? Did you move to a new state? A lot of times if the other family members are sick, you can kind of piece together a puzzle that tells you that maybe your environment is part of the problem. And then if you do know you're in that environment and you go away for vacation and you feel better, and then you come back and have a headache and fatigue and brain fog, those are clues that tell you that your environment might be playing a role in your illness. And then of course, if anyone else in your household is ill. This was an article almost 10 years ago now by Janet Hope, 10 years exactly, where she talked about mechanism of illness with mold includes not only just exposure and allergy, but inflammation, oxidative stress, toxicity, infection, allergy, and irritant effects. So in medical school, we're taught that mold is an allergen. It is true, mold is an allergen, but the bigger picture here is that mold can cause innate immune system dysfunction and run away with this cycle of inflammation and cytokine production and cause all kinds of systemic effects besides just allergies. So what is the big deal about mycotoxins? So mold itself is spores in the mold, and mold produces toxins. These toxins are smaller than VOC, volatile organic compounds like molecular particulate matter 2.5 or below. So there's a measurement we can use as far as how big the particulate in our air is. And these things are really, really tiny is the bottom line. So you need a good air filter that actually filters out the VOCs, not just the HEPA particulate. And these small little guys can go right into our lungs and diffuse into the alveoli, right into the bloodstream. So literally within seconds of being in a moldy environment, you can inhale these toxins and have an effect on your brain or your system very, very quickly. They don't need any transport. They can go immediately into the blood with inhalation into our lungs. And they can attach themselves to enzymes that involve insulin receptor signaling. So we see people become pre-diabetic in mold. We see people gain weight in mold. We see people have all kinds of hormonal or thyroid or adrenal dysfunctions because the mold can actually affect all of the hormetic systems. And this is a vicious cycle because these foreign antigens stay in the body and they kind of cause this immune inflammation unless we actually detox, which I'll talk about today on how to do that. And they circle around and around like a merry-go-round, and unless we tag them and are able to really eliminate them from our body, they can cause a lot of inflammation. Common biotoxins that cause chronic inflammatory response, which is kind of the illness that can come from mold. Obviously, mold, some of the big ones are Aspergillus, Penicillium, Chaetomium, Willaria, Stachybotrys. Toxins associated with ticks can also do this. Cyanobacter from freshwater blue-green algae can do this, and marine dinoflagellates like Cingulata toxin. Now we think of mold and water damage building, but it's way bigger than that. It's not just mold, but it's other things that are in the toxic soup of the water damaged porous materials like drywall or anywhere where there's porous materials that have been water soaked. When mold grows, all of these other things can be there as well and can contribute to the illness. So we said we're going to talk about the gut. I want to go just briefly into the gut, and then we'll go over total protocols to get you well. Mycotoxins dramatically affect the gut, and we find this from some studies of actually children in Africa that had accidentally contaminated food sources. So they were eating mycotoxins from mold, and in particular, it showed a picture that looked like inflammatory bowel disease. So it actually mimicked like Crohn's or colitis in these children and increased their risk of food allergies as well. This is the study that showed in the children the exposure to some of these aflatoxins and trichosethines, which are toxins that are made by the mold. It caused malabsorption in the gut. It caused villus atrophy. Villi are like the shag carpet that line your gut and increase absorptive surface. And when you have villus atrophy, same thing in celiac disease, those villi get denuded, they get ruined, and you have hardwood floor. You have no absorptive surface. And this was happening in the small bowels of the children. You can see to the left here, this is a picture in the microscope of the villi that they're ruined, they're shortened, so that absorptive surface is a lot less than on the right where you see a normal villi, normal length, and this is after mold exposure. These are some of the keys from the article that were helpful for restoring the gut. We had zinc, we had vitamin D, we had vitamin A, we had spore probiotics, we had glutamine and bovine immune globulins. So those are some of the core nutrients that are helpful for restoring the gut. Okay, so we'll switch to treatment. Well, what do we do about this? I've certainly framed the problem. You're probably scared to death now, but I do have some practical solutions for you. So let's dive into that. First of all, I can't go on without talking about limbic retraining because there is literally a chemical toxic trigger when you inhale the chemical of the mold, mycotoxins, and other chemicals. You can actually have a limbic or amygdala fight or flight response that's traumatic. And so many people get into a state of fear of they're mold avoiders. There's nothing wrong with that. Avoiding mold in the beginning can really, really help people to get well. But if you stay in that place for years and years and decades and you can't go outside, or you have to camp and live outside homes, and there's some real serious situations where patients have trouble even being indoors. And a piece of the puzzle is limbic retraining. So some of the things you could do are DNRS, the Gupta protocol, Stephen Porges' Safe and Sound. I'm a big fan of binaural beats, which calm the system. You can do neurofeedback, you can do hypnosis, you can do cranial sacral therapy. So there's many, many ways to help your limbic system retraining, and that's a piece of the puzzle in getting well from mold. Mast cell activation. Okay, so I wrote about this in my blog. You can read a lot more about it all over the internet. It's a big deal now because mast cells are being more activated by mold, and we want to know what to do about this. So this is a second step, because if your mast cells are angry and crazy and you need to deal with them, you need to deal with those first before you'll be able to tolerate much of the treatment. These are some of the common tips and tricks for mast cell activation. I don't love to use steroids, but if it's severe, we can use steroids. We can use non-steroid anti-inflammatories or immune modulatory. Those are the big guns, but most of the time I'm using H1 and H2 blockers, leukotriene antagonists, which are mast cell stabilizers, and sometimes bisphosphonates. Common nutrients that help with mast cell are quercetin, nettles, Chinese skullcap, and paramine or perilla seed extract. Those are some of my favorites. And these are some of the drugs on the right side that can also be helpful. Again, these are some of the big guns. You can use natural things as well, but you want to address limbic system number 1, mast cell number 2. Avoiding high histamine foods can be important if you have mast cell activation or histamine intolerance. This is just a list of some of the common foods, especially fermentation. Any sort of protein that's broken down and fermented, so leftover foods, especially like chicken or fish or beef, fermented products, those are all pretty high in histamine, and you'd want to be careful if you have histamine intolerance or mast cell activation. Fungal colonization. This is not as much talked about, but it's very common with mold exposure for patients to have fungal colonization. So it's really important to treat that fungal colonization with antifungals if it's present. Not everybody has this. Symptoms might be fatigue, brain fog, gas and bloating, white coating on the tongue, rectal itching, insomnia, anxiety, mood swings, worsening rash or acne. Those are all common symptoms. You saw those pictures I showed you of my awful face and acne. We know that C4A, a split complement product, which is often elevated in our blood after mold exposure, will cause cystic acne. And we know that fungal infections and basically colonization can cause rashes around the eyes. Some of the pictures that I showed you earlier, those were also related to fungal colonization in my own body. Treatment includes different medications, which would be by prescription with your doctor's, oversight, because those can be pretty toxic to the liver if not regulated. And then on the right side, you can see different herbs that are really powerful: undelicate acid, caprylic acid, garlic, berberine, oregano. I use both, and I use combinations because fungi can be kind of resistant. So often I'll treat patients for 4 to 6 months for antifungals if needed. And I definitely like the herbs, they work well, but usually I'll use combinations of herbs. This is just a snapshot of a low mold diet. You can also find more on the internet, and eliminating all sugar and refined carbs. Grain-free tends to be helpful, but not essential. Paleo style, organic, animal protein, high healthy fats, adequate fiber. If you have a histamine issue, avoid fermented foods. And if you have a mold allergy, you avoid moldy foods and yeast. That's subject to the mold allergy. Not everybody has trouble with eating well, I would say no eating moldy foods, but not everybody has trouble with fungi like mushrooms. This was just a study in mice that showed colonization was lower. This would be fungal colonization was lower in mice fed coconut oil rich diet versus soybean. So coconut oil is another thing you can use. And you can use MCT oil in your coffee, like bulletproof coffee, or you can use coconut oil in your cooking, and it reduces candida as well. Okay, so let's switch in our last few minutes here to detox and what to do about detox and kind of how we can frame this of what's the next steps. So one thing I always say, and I'll be talking about this through the whole time, but super simple: clean air, clean water, clean food. Clean air is about getting yourself an air filtration system. Super simple. You can have a standalone unit like I do in my bedroom. I literally have 5 air filters at work and 3 at my house. So I have lots of air filters, and you want to get one that has both HEPA and VOC air filtration. That VOC is that volatile organic compounds that's at 2.5 microns and less. So you really need that for the mycotoxin load, formaldehyde, and other sorts of things. We really saw this important after the fires, the wildfires. We've had a lot in both California and Colorado. And a little over a year ago, we had massive wildfires in my community, burnt over 1,000 homes. And the sequelae afterwards was the air quality was horrendous. So it was really important at that time to have air filtration in the home. Regularly replace your furnace filter with a high quality MERV 7 or higher filter, and you want to have that air replacement, even if you just have your fans going on your furnace every 15-20 minutes, that changes the air in your home and changes the quality of the air as well. Clean water, super important. Try not to drink out of plastic water bottles. Get filtered or spring mineral water. Reverse osmosis is a great way to have a household filter, but it does take out the minerals. So you want to be careful of that. You want to replace minerals if you're using reverse osmosis. And then clean food. Try to eat organic whenever possible, pesticide free, local, sustainable is really important because you're decreasing toxic load when you decrease the inputs of air, water, and food. It's just an example in my office, an air filter that I have these all over the place. So I just want to show you in real life that I practice it. Now, generally, you want to get a professional to check your air quality. There's building biologist, and there's air quality specialist, and there's IEPs. You can find them in your area. And in our Q&A, if Brian wants to ask questions, we can talk about where to find good people. But the bottom line here is you can get home air meters that show particulate and VOCs. Now, these VOCs could be on the left. You see that total VOC is incredibly high. That could be from like a new carpet or something that's off-gassing. It may not be microbial VOCs, which are from mold, but it is possible to get these home air filters for about $150, and you can test your air quality. But typically, I recommend a professional. Okay, so how do we detox? These are some of the basic principles. You want to optimize elimination and excretion. That's through hydration, it's water. Sweating, so infrared sauna can be helpful, making sure your bowels are functioning and you're not constipated. Optimizing the gut, I'll talk specifically about tips to do that, and aiding biotransformation in the liver. Mitochondrial function is key. I'll talk about tips to do that, and then liver detox as well, and that's one of the core components. Okay, so brief description of phase 1, phase 2 of the liver. Our liver is a right upper quadrant right below our ribs there. If you push your fingers in below your ribs, you may actually feel the edge of the liver there. If it's really, really hard, you might have an enlarged liver and you would want to get that checked out. But basically, our liver is our master detox organ. When I go to the Swiss Mountain Clinic to do detox weeks or retreats, we call the liver the queen, and respect the queen because she does a lot of work for a detox. There's phase 1 and phase 2. And what happens is we have these toxins like mold, mycotoxins, and other chemicals in our environment that go into phase 1, that first part of liver detox, and they're transformed into this intermediate, which you can see in the center of the screen. That intermediate is then transformed from phase 1 to phase 2, and phase 2 is eliminated in the urine, bile, and stool in a water-soluble form, so our body can actually get rid of that. So this whole process, I explain it because it's really important to support this process in order to get well from mold. And you can see on phase 1, the nutrients needed are vitamin B1, B3, B6, B12, folic acid, especially methylfolate, glutathione, and flavonoids from bright colored fruits and vegetables. And then phase 2, you have some more deep processes like methionine, cysteine, that's like N-acetylcysteine, magnesium, glutathione, more B vitamins, glycine, taurine. And these processes, conjugation, they basically take something that's not water soluble and make it soluble. The important thing here is if you push phase 1, which coffee actually pushes phase 1, not a bad thing. But if you get stuck in the middle and your phase 2 is slow, you can actually become more sick or more toxic because those intermediates in the middle are actually more toxic than the original product. So it's very, very important that phase 2 is supported and that you get these out of the liver into the gallbladder, into the bile. And that's where we use binders. Binders are bile acid binders. There's prescription and non-prescription forms, and those will actually have a charged they basically escort those toxins out of your gut. If we don't use binders, the enterohepatic circulation, which is how our body recirculates those bile acids that contain cholesterol and toxins, is very efficient. It's about 95% efficient. So if we don't use binders or other ways to get those out of our body, they just recirculate around and around like a merry-go-round, and it can cause problems. So key nutrients, glutathione and precursors, you want to have a glutathione or things like NAC, lipoic acid, all the types of things that can help aid that phase 1 and phase 2. You want to have liver support. Liver support would be milk thistle, NAC, lipoic acid, maybe some bitters to help the bile. Binders are huge. So this would be like clay or charcoal, glycomannans, chlorella, even cilantro can help. And there's many, many types of binders. There's prescription binders like cholestyramine and Welchol. And sometimes a combination works best, but you'd want to work with your doctor because different binders bind to different molds best. So I have to look at the types of mold and then decide on the binders. Many patients are dehydrated with mold, and so electrolytes can be incredibly helpful for that. And then NAD. Gut microbiome phase 3. Okay, so we talked about the liver. This is gut microbiome. Super, super important here. The gut is where we take that bile and out in the stool, and the microbiome can actually transform toxins. So you take this liver, we talked about phase 1 and phase 2, that's converting a fat soluble toxin into water and eliminated in the stool. But if you're constipated, that leads to recirculation and reabsorption of this toxin. So really, really important not to be constipated. Some tips and tricks for that would be magnesium citrate or buffered vitamin C powder, anything you can use to kind of pull the bowel osmotically and make sure you're having normal bowel movements. Gut microflora, if you have a healthy microbiome, it can transform toxins in a good way. And if you have an unhealthy microbiome, it can actually clip the little attachments that hold the toxins and allow them to be re-released into your circulation. So your microbiome is huge. I recommend especially here spore probiotics and humic and fulvic acids to support the gut. So this is also gut support. Elimination diet, if you're having trouble with food sensitivities because of the mold, you can go on an elimination diet. The most important might be just elimination of gluten and sugar. But if you want to go further, the top 7 are gluten, dairy, sugar, eggs, corn, soy, and alcohol. And those things can be eliminated for 30 days or longer. And often people tend to feel better when they eliminate those. Those aren't bad foods. Like someone said the other day, eggs, I love eggs. I got my farm fresh eggs. The only problem is those are the top 7 foods that people tend to react to. So just by the odds against you, those foods could be reacting, and you can just check and see. They may not be a problem for you, but you can take them out for 30 days and see if you feel better. The 5-hour program to heal the gut is something you'd work with your functional medicine doctor, but it basically looks at the microbiome, eliminates any dysbiosis like yeast, bacteria, parasites, gets you on a good food, clean diet, and then heals the gut through things like glutamine or other gut types of healing things. We mentioned spore probiotics, we mentioned bovine immune globulins earlier with the mold and the gut. And then stool bulking agents can be helpful. Soluble fibers and insoluble fibers, both incredibly important. Probiotics we talked about. Cholagogue herbs are things that stimulate bile secretion. So dandelion, rhubarb, gentian, and other bitters are great. And I learned the power in the Swiss Mountain Clinic several years ago when I went on detox retreats with patients that coffee enemas, colon hydrotherapy can also be incredibly helpful. So you want to look at that as well. Lymphatic support, so regular gentle exercise. So lymphatics are your highways that are in your tissues that are not vascular. And these are also places where you can get stopped up and toxic. So just making sure you have lymphatic drainage remedies. Hydrotherapy, that would be like cold plunge or ending your shower with a little bit of cold water at the end. Castor oil packs can be really powerful. Dry brushing, rebounding. And then I mentioned the cholagogue herbs. Here's a few of them: rhubarb, calendula, burdock, echinacea, and astragalus. So just to summarize, we have limbic system first. Next is your mast cell activation. Next is your detox, liver phase 1, phase 2. And some of the things I mentioned: glutathione, liver support, binders, NAD, and electrolytes. And then at the end, you're going to work on the gut, probiotics, bowel movements, maybe coffee enemas, and lymphatic support. And that gives you a really, really comprehensive detox protocol. So top takeaways for today. I always like to keep it simple. And I mentioned clean air. Make sure you have an air filter in your bedroom at the very least. Clean water. Make sure you're drinking pure, filtered, or mineral-based water. Mineral water from any sort of good European source is excellent. Source of minerals tends to keep you alkaline, where detox happens better. If you use a reverse osmosis system in your house, you want to add minerals back. Clean food whenever possible. Use organic. And if you don't have the resources to buy all organic, you can go to Environmental Working Group, EWG.org, a nonprofit that talks about the dirty dozen. These are the top most contaminated foods and fruits and vegetables with pesticides. So those at the very least, you want to buy organic. Clean mind. So make sure you're dealing with childhood trauma. You're having a positive mental attitude. You're getting outside in nature. All those things that help our mind and our outlook. And mold is especially bad. It can cause depression, anxiety, insomnia. It can cause overwhelm, or it can cause fear or lack of insight, like I talked in the beginning. So really, really important to address the mind and the body, which is movement and exercise. You know, I just got done, I was in Costa Rica for a retreat and teaching, and I met Dan Buettner, who's the author of The Blue Zones, and learned they're so simple. All these areas in the world, the blue zones are those areas where there's an extraordinary number of centenarians, these people who've lived to be over 100, and the commonalities were movement, relationships with friends and family, Food, healthy food. They were 90% vegetarian, although they did eat meat. It was lots of plant-based. Connections with people, and faith. And they had all different backgrounds, all different religions, but they all had some belief in a higher purpose. So those are some of the things that are common with centenarians that we can take a lesson from. And if you want free content, there's loads and loads and loads of interviews with other experts, including our host on YouTube. You can find those just on YouTube. And then finally, that's it. So Brian, we're back. Stop.
Hey, that was awesome. It's so hard to get so much stuff into like a short period. So I was taking some notes on a couple things where like maybe we could dive into just a little bit more with some of the time that we have. First off, the pictures you showed of yourself, not a lot of people would do that. So powerful to show that stuff. You know, I've done the same with me. Mine wasn't as bad, but I had things like that was going on too. And I think it's just really helpful for people to see like the stuff can happen, right? It's not like this death sentence. You get in the Facebook groups, it's all of a sudden doom or gloom, you're going to die, live in a tent. And that's not necessarily what you need to do. There's a path. And I think it's awesome that you're willing to do that. So thanks for
saying that, Brian, because it took me years to be brave enough. I mean, this has been a journey because that's gross looking. And it's like, but I wanted to show like you can heal. My skin now is clear. But at that time, if you're there now and you're in the midst of this, you feel like it's never going to end. I promise you, this too shall pass.
Absolutely. I mean, images are so much more. We could talk all day. You do a lot of educating. I do a lot of it. But at some point, like seeing it sometimes just helps crystallize it. So I think it's really awesome. So I had one like top line question. You said at the beginning, you know, if there's a mold issue in your home, you know, you're not going to get better, basically, right? Is there any sort of variance to that, right? Like obviously like a person and kind of what their individual situation is, they're more sensitive, they're less sensitive, their bucket is more full, their bucket is less full, like all of this stuff. That's one of the things that I'd like to dive into a little more, because I think when we say that and somebody just hears that as a blanket statement, they're like, oh great, you know, it's ruined, I have to leave, or there's no hope in finding another place. Can you maybe talk about like when there are times where maybe if you're reducing your exposure 50% or something like that, how there might be benefits?
I love that you're saying this, because otherwise there's so much out there that's like, leave everything, walk out of your house, don't come back. And that's extreme. There are a few cases that are like that, right? You and I have seen them. You're like, you don't want to be in that house, like post Hurricane Katrina, where the mold's growing up the walls. I mean, there's just no doubt you don't want to stay in that house. There's no way. But I love this because this is every day with patients that are overwhelmed. And as I mentioned, there's literally a chemical process of mold that overwhelms us. Even if we're like stable, we have a great family, we're connected, we've done our work emotionally, it's still a chemical overwhelm. It literally happens to all of us. So if you're in this and you're feeling overwhelmed, that's normal. But what I want to say to you and the listeners and everybody out there is, what I like to do is where I'm at now, I was just in Costa Rica last week, there was a moldy room, I got hit so bad, but what happens is I know now I'm resilient, it doesn't cause fear, and I know how to quickly turn it around within 24 hours or less, I'm back to 100% baseline. So what I want to instill in the listeners is there is hope and there's ways to create more resilience. Now, the first step is that toxic load bucket. I mentioned that because when my bucket was full, there's no amount of thinking happy thoughts that's going to get me undone from that mold. It took months and months and months to detox and to lower that toxic load. But if you are in a moldy environment, you can't leave, or maybe your landlord won't do anything. First thing is dilution is the solution to pollution. So do what you can to dilute the air. You open your windows if possible. You get airflow if possible. You put fans in there if possible. That air exchange rate, you put filters in your furnace, you put air filters in your bedroom, because you literally can decrease the load by a dramatic percentage just by changing the airflow. And that's number one. And then number two, you can start the detox process. You could start infrared sauna. You could start, because as you lower your load, you'll become a little less sensitive. And then you may want to move eventually or remediate, but you have a little bit of time. And again, it may take a slower pace than if you were to leave the house. And I also want to speak to getting rid of all your things. You don't have to get rid of all your things. I didn't. I kept all my clothes. I kept all my shoes. And that's important because you can clean many, many things. The thing I think is the hardest is what's behind me is books. Books are hard. And I don't know, what I would recommend is if you're in a home and you're moving or you're in the midst of a remediation and you're not sure, store your books in plastic bins that are sealable in the garage or somewhere away from your house, because, or your, maybe it's just scrapbooks or priceless items. You can always go back. And what usually happens is 6 months later, the patient opens the box and like, whoo, I have a headache, and they feel so sick. They're like, oh, I don't want to touch those. And they know. So you can actually put them aside temporarily while you get well and then come back to them.
All that's, I mean, it's so funny. You're saying like everything that I like say all the time too. It's so a couple of things just to go on that. So one, and maybe you can tie into this too, just to close the loop on this. Most people, like when we go in and do an inspection and find a number of things in homes, first off, if someone like you is referring someone who you're like, listen, this person has an issue in their house, this is not an exaggeration. Literally 100% of the time, there is something happening in their house. For all of you that are watching this, if your doctor's like, hey, I think you're being exposed, you are. I know it's like a bold statement to say, but honestly, from my experience, you are, right? So first off, believe them. That's the first thing I want to say. Believe them and don't think that it's like overboard and you don't have to do it because they're just trying to help, right? That's the first thing. Now, the second thing I see a lot is that usually it's not one thing in a house that's creating a bucket to fill to the point where your body's, freaking out, right? Usually there's a number of things that are going on. With that, a remediation price tag might be high in order to address those things. So I'm setting all that up to say most people are not able to do, let's say 100% of remediation in a house because there's cost, effects and that sort of thing. Have you seen people where they go in and let's say they find, 5, 6, 7 things, whatever, and they're able to kind of prioritize the things that seem to be the biggest impact. Maybe they pick 2, 3, or 4 of them, and that's where they focus their dollars. Have you seen people be able to come back from that or not?
Okay. Again, we are so aligned, Brian. I love what you're saying because the first thing is that you can get by with maybe not every single last piece because first of all, we know now 1 in 4 buildings, I think it's more like 1 in 2 buildings in the US are affected by mold. That means your
more than that.
courthouse, your school systems. Yeah, right. You and I see this all the time.
Yeah.
And as cheaper, faster construction, and this does not eliminate these multi-million-dollar, beautiful, beautiful homes. I think some of the worst mold damages in these huge, huge homes where there's not a real either the construction was quick or it wasn't really thought through about all the different systems. Someone had a recent humidifier system in their home and it was all moldy, very, very large, big home. So that doesn't eliminate that. So what about partial remediation? What can you do? How can this work? I feel like, and I know you agree with me here, you need to remediate that. So say behind this wall, there's an issue, you open that up. As soon as you open that up, if it's not contained, it blows up your house. So number one, you have to do it under containment. You have to do it properly. And then you have to check before you take down that containment to make sure that air inside that containment is pretty clean. So you check it, take it down. After that, you're not done. I think the biggest key to people getting well is think about this. Mold spores are like dried flower arrangements. And if you flick that dried flower arrangement or you blow on it, it spreads these fragments all over your environment. Those fragments will still cause illness even if they're dead and treated and gone. So you can remediate, but if you have dead fragments, and then we didn't even talk about these mycotoxins, which are 2.5 microns and smaller, so smaller than viruses, and those are produced by the mold. And if your mold was in your house for 2, 3, 5 years, those mycotoxins are spread in your home. So the most important thing after remediation is fogging and cleaning, a small particulate clean. I find that for the sickest patients, the remediation is just half the battle, maybe a quarter of the battle. But afterwards, you fog or do something to bring down the particulate, and then you wipe down every surface. You can do it yourself. You can hire someone to do it for a lot of money. But that piece of the puzzle, getting the dust out of your home and then keeping the dust out of your home, mold rides on dust, mycotoxins rides on dust. So those pieces are actually more important in the end of your health.
I use the exact same analogy. It's so funny.
Oh my goodness, I love it.
Mine's tied to a story when I bought my wife a bunch of flowers when we were dating and they dried out. It actually happened. I went to grab them. It blew all over the place, but it's like the same exact story. It's so funny. 100% remediation is in 2 phases. Phase 1 is source. Phase 2 is the mess the source is made everywhere. Real quickly, honestly, the source behind this wall is not what's impacting us. It's not like our face is behind the wall, right? It's the factory that's creating what we are exposed to. What we're actually exposed to are these small particles that Dr. Jill's talking on. This stuff moves and spreads throughout the house. It doesn't stay like in this tight little box where the problem is. So if you get rid of the source and you get rid of it, but all the smoke that was created from this factory that was pumping smoke out is still moving throughout the house, you're still going to get exposed. You're going to move back into your house. You're still not going to feel good. You're going to think that all of this stuff doesn't work. Again, you're going to think you have to go live in the woods in a tent because remediation is impossible and blah, blah, blah. The truth is remediation only doesn't work for 2 reasons. 1, you didn't find all the sources. Or 2, you just didn't do it the right way. And the right way is that 2-phase approach. If you do those, you can handle it. Something that I've seen though, is that if there are a number of things going on in a space, let's say you have an inspection, there's like 7 source problems or something like that. And we kind of help to sort of prioritize, like, these seem to be the worst of the worst through testing and kind of understanding what's going on. If someone's addressed, let's say, like 3 or 4 of those, but they also do the cleaning process on the back end, because that's the accumulation of everything, you're reducing your exposure load maybe by like 70-75% at the end of that. And then their body's kind of able to work with it with the, with the support that you get on your end, and people can get there, right? So I just want people to see it. There's hope. You don't have to knock your whole house down. You don't even literally have to do everything that's found in your house. Like, some people can do less, right? So
and I'll tell you personally, because I've had mold in this condo and in my workplace, and I've just experienced it all over the place. Every time I fog, even if I haven't remediated, which I don't recommend replacing that, but say you have to buy time. Your landlord won't do something for 2 months and you're stuck. Fogging and cleaning will bring down that load enough to reduce symptoms immediately.
Yes, because it brings it down. But here's the thing, and you keep saying it, a lot of people don't hear this, and remediators won't do it. It's not the fog. The fog
correct.
is a mechanism to attach to the particles that are so light in molecular weight that gravity doesn't affect them.
Yes.
The fog grabs them, makes them heavy, gravity brings it down. The key is the wiping and the cleaning and getting rid of it. Otherwise, it's all going to come right back.
Absolutely. I love that you said that, because some of you are like, oh, I fogged and I'm not going to be, or someone years ago, I won't say names, someone came in, oh, we have this new fog, can we fog your place? I got so sick from the fog because they didn't clean, they didn't know what they were doing, and I learned the hard way.
Yeah. Well, good. We hit on that for a minute. I want to go into some other things, but I'm glad that we could. I just think that piece of it makes it a little less overwhelming, because you talk about overwhelm and all this stuff, and it's 100% true. So I actually want to get to the limbic thing.
Yes.
Does everyone need to do this? So you said it was number 1 in the list. Does everyone need limbic retraining, or are there people that don't? Like, I'm just curious. I'm like, do you see this as like a must-have? Is it something that is nice if certain criteria are hit? Like, what's the thought on that?
So you said something earlier that I so related to, and it was 100% of the time if your doctor thinks there's mold. I've been doing this almost a decade, and I'm 100% right. Like, I may have an error in the future, but so far when I've suspected mold, 100% of the time I end up being right. And it's nothing to do with me. It's just that like you said, if your doctor, I want to say that because this limbic is similar. I was like, oh, this can't be everybody, really, like, especially people who are healthy and emotional. This is not like but there, as I read the literature, as I saw patients that were stuck, I think it's 100% of people have a chemical limbic response. And some people are very grounded and very resourced, and they barely notice it, or they're able to deal with it. It doesn't mean everybody has to go to therapy, but there is a connection to this trauma. And that's why there's so much related to fear around mold, am I getting exposure? And we've seen those patients that are stuck in that cycle. I love you, and I'm giving so much compassion to you. So there's no judgment here, because I know when you're there and you're like, oh my gosh, but I've seen patients over and over, and their house is actually pretty good, but then they start into this fear loop. And I've learned that we have to somehow address the limbic system, even if it's just a mantra you say on your walk every morning, or a prayer meditation. It can be very simple. It doesn't have to be thousands of dollars of therapy, but you must, I think 100% of people need to address the limbic system with mold exposure.
Yeah, I mean, it is a trauma. It's funny because I feel like trauma in like maybe the last year, I've just seen so much more of it, of people talking about it, but like almost not in this sense. Like, this exposure piece is its own trauma thing that's happening. And then a lot of the trauma talk has been tied more to like historical things when you're younger and stuff like that. But it's like 2 different versions of that. So I mean, that totally makes sense. Okay, a couple other things that I had. So you're talking about liver. You sort of answered it a little bit later, but I still want to talk about it. So the first thing I thought was castor oil, because when you put it on, you stick it over your liver, right? So I was going to ask, like, does that help in the liver portion of it, or is it just a lymphatic thing, or like, what's the benefit of castor oil? Because it's an easy thing that anyone can really do. And so just curious, like, how big of a role it plays.
Yeah, so I think of it as mobilization and excretion of toxins. Those are the 2 parts. And so you're thinking about, how do we mobilize? So when you get mold exposure, you're in a building for years or months. In your tissues, you literally have toxins that are in the fat tissue of your body. So we first have to mobilize those out of the tissues and into the bloodstream, because the bloodstream is where we go to the liver. So it's like, that's like your car filter, or so the blood goes from the gut to the liver, and the liver is your filter to take these toxins out. So first mobilization is sweating, infrared sauna, exercise, and glutathione, and some of these things that are pushing the detox. and even alkaline water, mineral water, all those things help our bodies to move the toxins out of the tissues into the bloodstream where they can be filtered. Then we talk about liver. Liver is so key because that is literally the organ that's going to pull these out. And then they're stuck into the bile, and they can be excreted as the bile goes through there. But it's so critical to understand that, because castor oil, for example, is going to help move the bile. Moving the bile is something we don't talk about. We're taught basics in medical school, but it's not something, in fact, most of my naturopathic friends have taught me a lot more than my allopathic education on moving bile. And that's why I gave a whole slide to lymphatics and the bile, because coffee enemas help move the bile. Castor oil packs help move the bile. Bitters, Swedish bitters help move the bile. And then lymphatic things like rebounding or lymphatic drainage or massage that's lymphatic oriented are all really, really key. And we get excited about glutathione and liver support and taking pills. But if we're not doing these other parts, we can get really stuck because we mobilize, but we aren't excreting. And if you mobilize and you're not excreting, this is where I'm sure you've seen clients, and I've seen patients, they get really sick when they start the detox process. And that's because they're mobilizing faster than they can excrete.
Yeah, the pathways aren't working properly, right? And so then it's like a traffic jam, basically. That's kind of what happens, and then it backs up. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So like when you're talking, like, so when we say lymphatic, is that your actual drainage pathways? Is that what we're talking? Is that sweating? Is that pooping? Is that all that? Or is some of that tied to gut also? Or like when we're talking pathways, do you actually have to work on those first to open them?
Ideally, yeah, you want, or at least at the same time, because if someone goes in the sauna, they've been massive mold exposure, and they go, for me, if I was in Cotomium, which I was last year with my kitchen had a leak, and I'd go in the sauna and I'd literally like go home and fall dead asleep because that's so much fatigue from that mobilization of the toxins. So if you're having, whether it's you're doing glutathione or you're doing NAC or liver support, or you're doing infrared sauna, or you're doing binders, and you get really tired or really foggy, you're mobilizing faster than you can excrete. So the excretion stuff is typically not pills. Lymphatic, like I said, the drainage, and these, so we have the blood is going to mobilize the toxins to the liver, but lymphatics are part of that too. It's like the lymphatics is a non-vascular pathway for detox. And the organs that eliminate this is we do some through our breath and our lungs, skin and sweating. That's why a lot of the PCBs and parabens and phthalates and organophosphates are best done through sweating or infrared sauna. And then you just wipe off that sweat afterwards, and that's how you eliminate. The urine will do it, so that your kidneys will filter the blood as well, and some things are eliminated. That's why we do urinary mycotoxin tests, because we can see those mycotoxins in the urine if someone's excreting. And the bowels are huge, which is why you can't be constipated. You have to make sure that bowels are moving. So before you start a detox, you make sure you're sweating, make sure you're moving, make sure your bowels function is normal, make sure you're urinating okay and you're hydrated with electrolytes. Maybe do some lymphatic dry brushing. That's a super simple thing I didn't talk about. Just take a regular natural bristle bath brush, and before you have one there? Oh my gosh, love it.
Literally,
yes.
Like, there you go.
And you brush towards the heart. So I did that this morning before my shower.
Yep.
Brilliant.
You got to have a lot of these things, especially when you're in houses all the time that have this stuff going on. You got to be doing this. It's literally in my office. I'm like, all right, I'm going to like.
I love it. And yeah, what you want to do is this little habit trick, hook it to something you already do. So maybe when right for your shower, your habit is grab that brush, right for you brush your teeth. You can do these things in conjunction with other habits you already have and make it just a daily routine.
Yeah, I actually saw that trick somewhere, like trick yourself to make a habit like quickly or something and link it to something you do every day at a certain time. That's like a really good idea, just like a life hack for people. Okay, so another question. So should everyone, let's take mold aside for a minute, right? There's all kinds of other things that are going on. Should everyone be taking binders just generally? Like there's so much stuff that we're exposed to outside of it, even air, I know it's an air quality thing, but like in general, should everyone be doing that?
So it's interesting because I had really bad mold years and years ago, and I still to this day, most days, take some binders. They could potentially over time, especially the prescription. So cholestyramine is a prescription binder. That's a heavy hitter. Now, the good thing is if you have high cholesterol, it's also, so bile acids also store cholesterol. So when you take these binders, especially prescription, they're labeled for use for lowering cholesterol. So if you have high cholesterol, the prescription binders are a great way to go. If you have low cholesterol, they're not so great because they are kind of depleting. Like I said, especially the prescription binders, I don't usually do long-term because they can pull minerals out as well. But something like clay or charcoal, I take more days than not still, because it kind of, what you want to do, whether it's dry brushing or castor oil packs or infrared sauna or binders, find a way for yourself to do daily detox, because if you do the January 21-day detox, that's not enough in our toxic world. You have to find ways that literally you can incorporate day to day. That's why I say clean air, clean water, clean food, and then daily detox. You need to incorporate these things because we're all so exposed to toxic load. So binders are safe. They can deplete minerals. They should be taken on an empty stomach. If you're mineral depleted, you either take minerals back, which is what I do, and take binders regularly. But there is some cautions with mineral depletion.
Got it. And is that blood testing that can show you that? Like, how do you know?
Yeah, there's micronutrient testing. You can do it on regular labs, and there's certain labs that have a whole panel. And you could assume like for 6 months, a year, you're probably fine. But the truth is we're all deficient in magnesium. So no matter what, we should probably all be taking some extra magnesium, maybe some zinc and potassium as well. And if you have a good electrolyte, that can be a good source of some of these too.
Cool. I was actually going to ask you about magnesium. You said it later, citrate is good for the movement of bowel, but there's like 100 different magnesiums and it's so freaking confusing. Like, is there like certain magnesiums you should be taking? You just mentioned it's important. We're deficient in it.
Yeah, this is a great question because I use them all differently for different things. Mag citrate's the one if you're constipated or you need to loosen the bowels. If you aren't constipated, you take too much, you will know it. Mag citrate's that one, that's for bowels. Mag glycinate has glycine attached. Glycine makes GABA. Glycine is rate limiting for glutathione. So if you want a detox or help with sleep, mag glycinate is great at bedtime. Mag citramate has malic acid, which is good for fibromyalgia and fatigue and some of the muscle pain. So if you have a lot of pain in your muscles, mag citramate is great. My new favorite, which I take in my pink drink every morning, is mag L-threonate. That's brain mag, crosses the blood-brain barrier. So it's really good for the brain and crosses that. And if you don't know, you can get a mag like chelate or combination of these. But I often use very specific ones for brain, for bowels, for detox, for sleep. And you can pick and choose based on that.
I feel like I'm just diving into stuff that's like beyond, but okay. So you have all these things, they all have a different purpose. Do you take all of them throughout a day? Do you how do you just like literally the magnesium portion of it? How are you?
Yeah.
setting
And
that up?
again, let's just frame this. So apple today, an organic, local grown, beautiful apple today has 1/5 of the magnesium because our soils are depleted. One of the things I've been known to say is we used to say autoimmunity begins in the gut. And now I say it begins in our soils because our soils are so depleted and they reflect our microbiome. So I know I'm tangential here, but it's important because even if you eat a wonderful nutrient-rich diet, you are going to be deficient in magnesium, guaranteed. So you can just assume you need magnesium. So what to do? If you're not sure and bowels are normal, I might just find one of those mag chelate. My favorite is super mag. That's what I give my patients. But the other option is, again, if you want, like I drink in my morning drink, something called mag L-threonate, which is the brain mag. So you can do that in the morning. Bedtime mag glycinate. So those are kind of the tips and tricks on mag.
Got it.
And doses would be 250 minimum. Usually I give people about 500. And again, often it's to bowel tolerance. So any mag in high doses could cause loose stools. If you get loose stools, you're taking too much.
Got it. Awesome. Went down the magnesium rabbit hole for a second. All right. I only had, I think, one more question. The gut portion of things, you're talking about spore probiotics. So first off, 2 questions. One, the difference between spore probiotic and like a non-spore probiotic, just so people know. And then 2, this is asking for a friend. So I took a spore probiotic and massive reaction in my stomach, like curl over on the ground pain in my stomach. So I'm sure that will happen to other people. So like if people start taking like some of these probiotic things or something and they experience something like that, 1, what does that possibly mean? And 2, kind of like, what do you do with that?
Okay, so not all spores are created equal. So I'm going to give you some real specifics just because you asked on different brands that I like and kinds. Or is that okay? Or maybe not? Should I just do generic?
Maybe just do generic. I don't know.
Okay, you got it. No problem at all. So yeah, I've written about this if you want to know more, but let's go generic. Okay, so Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus coagulans, those are common generic spores. Those are really gentle and you can find one spore strain and usually like even you would probably do okay with that. I'll tell you 20 years ago with Crohn's, I didn't know what spores were, but I found one accidentally and it was the one thing that helped me the most. I didn't even know what it was. Spores are the only thing known compared to Lactobacillus, Bifidobacillus, all the other types of probiotics that actually increase diversity. And that's king in our gut. So we want more types of microbes because we're more resilient if we have diversity. So I love spores because if someone has a tough gut, they have SIBO, they have SIFO, they have dysbiosis, spores tend to be well tolerated. What could have happened to you is you took like a 5-spore strain or a spore with prebiotic or something, and
Mhm.
it might have just been way too much. And it could have caused some die-off with some dysbiosis and caused this horrible cramping. So what I would do next time is try either one spore or try like a part of a cap to see if you could tolerate a little bit, and then work your way up. Because generally, if you do that one spore or you do part of a cap, it's well tolerated, but you may have to work up a little. And sometimes the reason you have that is you're getting rid of excess wrong bacteria. You're kind of having some die-off.
Got it. Actually, that reminds me of one more thing. So gut, we didn't talk parasites at all. Does that
Yeah.
fit in? Where does that fit in the equation? I also did a parasite cleanse a long time ago, and man, I got massive die-off. I was, again, laying on the floor, cuddled up, like in pain. So it just triggered a trauma probably that I need to deal with. But anyways,
It's super common. And so, in fact, again, Swiss Mountain Clinic, when we went there, they're doctors, they're German MDs and, medical doctors, they treat everyone for a parasite cleanse because they assume it's there. If you're doing a stool test, sometimes it'll pick it up, but many, many times, for example, Giardia, which is one of those really bad parasites you can get. I got it in Honduras decades ago, awful diarrhea and weight loss. And that one takes an average of 7 tests to get a positive. So you may be missing it. And so if you suspect it, bloating that's unexplained by other causes, weight gain that's unexplained by other causes, foreign travel, eating on the road in street vendors in third world countries, those are all kind of risk factors for parasites.
and just so everybody knows, parasites are not if you traveled somewhere, like probably everybody has some parasites to some extent. This is more of a question. The mineral deficiency part of it, is one of the things that could be causing that, the fact that parasites are essentially there and they're kind of stealing that before it gets to you? Is that like a clue that maybe that's something that's going on?
2 things come to mind. Definitely parasites can steal some of your good nutrition, and they can cause weight gain or weight loss. Even though we think of it as typically like malnourished kids in Africa, but they can also cause weight gain. And the other thing with minerals is if you have leaky gut or permeability, you're going to be losing minerals. And we just require, when we're detoxing, we require more minerals. So minerals are so essential and so commonly depleted. I recommend people drink mineral water like San Pellegrino or Gerolsteiner or any of those out there that are good European mineral waters, because that actually aids in the detox process. And if you have a Herxheimer or that where you're mobilizing quicker than excreting, just drinking mineral water between meals can be super helpful with that.
Got it. So it's just a general practice on like the water portion of what you were talking about, like kind of finding a mineral water. Because I use I use a gravity filtration that is in a big silver can.
Me too.
And so from a mineral perspective, though, is that like removing a lot of minerals? Should you be supplementing?
The one you're talking about is the least likely to remove minerals. I have that one too, and it's actually really great for keeping some of the minerals. But I just say, again, we're so depleted. I forgot to mention the other thought, glyphosate, Roundup, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. They found traces in California, organic wines. So glyphosate, Roundup is everywhere. Glyphosate is a mineral chelator. So as we get loaded with glyphosate and exposures in our food, once again, it literally pulls out the minerals and starves some of the good bacteria. So that's another reason why we're being more depleted. So that kind of filter is probably better than the average. If you drink heavy mineral water with meals, you can dilute the hydrochloric acid. So I'd drink regular filtered or spring water, and then between your meals or as you're sipping water while you're working, do the mineral water or at bedtime.
Cool. Awesome. Well, those are all like the things I had, which drug this on forever. So we'll see if everybody hung out. We'll see if all of it makes the cut. I don't even know. We'll see next time on the next episode. Anyways, thank you. I love talking to you. I feel like I could talk to you.
Brian, it's like we talk for hours. I love it. Thank you so much for your great questions and for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you again. Everyone, Dr. Jill Carnahan, I know you're at home, but maybe give her one of these. She's not going to see you recorded this long, but she'll feel it. It'll be good. Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.